In this video, I'm going to show you 3 words that you can use to show time relationships in your writing. These are before, after, and while. All 3 of these words can be used in complex sentences as subordinating conjunctions, and they're very useful and important when you're telling a story, writing a narrative, essay, narrative paragraph, or explaining a process. They might seem simple, but there are many ways that students find them difficult and make mistakes with them, so I'm going to show you how to use them correctly. The first one is before. Let me show you how it works, and I'm going to give you a very clear example. So here we have 2 actions. Number 1, I brushed the snow off my car. Number 2, I drove to work. So I'm showing you this because I think it's a very clear example. Of course, first I need to remove the snow, and then I can drive to work. So let me show you how to join these 2 sentences into one sentence with the word before. I'm going to do it like this. I brushed the snow off my car before I drove to work. I brushed the snow off my car before I drove to work. So this sentence, you'll notice, has 2 parts or 2 clauses. Each one has a subject and a verb. I brushed and I drove. Those are the 2 subjects and verbs. And together we have the 2 clauses. Joined with the word before, now I've got a complex sentence. So what is confusing for students sometimes is that notice the word before is actually connected to the clause with the second action. I brushed the snow off my car before I drove to work. Now I can also write this sentence another way, and it means exactly the same thing. I can write it like this. Before I drove to work, I brushed the snow off my car. This has the same meaning. The only difference is a difference with punctuation. When I start my sentence with before, or any of the words we look at today, at the end of this first clause with before, I'm going to have a comma. Before I drove to work, comma, I brushed the snow off of my car. So that's the only difference. We can say the sentence in 2 ways and it has the same meaning. Let's take a look at how to use the word after. Okay, I'm going to give you another example that I hope is very clear. Number 1, I took off my shoes. Number 2, I got into bed. So, of course, I need to take off my shoes first before I get into bed under the covers. This is definitely the order that this happened. So I have the 2 things, and I'm going to join them together with the word after. And I'll do it like this. I got into bed after I took off my shoes. So again, 2 parts to this sentence, 2 clauses. I'm joining them with the word after, and after is connected to the actual first action. That's where sometimes people get confused. And just like the other example, I can write it 2 ways. I can say, after I took off my shoes, comma, I got into bed. So those were some pretty clear basic examples, and let me show you a few examples with before and after where the language or the topic is a little bit more advanced. But keep the basic examples in mind to help you remember how to use the words. So I might write something like this. He applied to several jobs before he was accepted. Or this. Wash your vegetables thoroughly before you cut them. Maybe this was in a process or explanation instructional paragraph. Or before the actor went on stage for his performance, comma, he rehearsed his lines a final time. Before you make a decision, comma, think carefully about your options. And here's a couple with after. After living all over the world, comma, we finally settled in Canada. Remember, I'm using the word after with the actual first action. Or this, after you mix the ingredients, put everything in the oven. Proofread your essay after you finish writing it. So remember, first you will finish, then you will proofread or check for mistakes. Very good advice. Okay, let's talk about our third word, while. We use while when we're talking about actions that occur at the same time, or there's some kind of overlap or interruption of an activity. So here in my example, I read a magazine while I was waiting in the doctor's office. So I have this action of waiting, and during this time, I did another action. I read a magazine. So we have two actions that have some kind of overlap, and I'm connecting them with the word while. Here's another one. While I was brushing the snow off my car, my hands got cold. My hands got cold while I was brushing the snow off my car. Now technically I started brushing first, and as this action continued, the next action or the next thing happened. My hands got cold. So let's look at one more example. Often while is a connector that we use when we're explaining an interrupted activity. My phone rang while I was eating dinner. So I started eating dinner. As this process continued, my phone rang and it interrupted this first action of eating. So this is how we use while, when we have two actions and either there's an interruption or they happen at the same time, something like this. So now let's look at a few common problems that students have when they're using these words in their writing. The first is using the words before and after with the wrong action. Let me show you what I mean. Something like this. I took off my shoes after I got into bed. Remember, first we took off the shoes, right? Then climbed into bed. So the word that we should use here is actually before. I took off my shoes before I got into bed. Remember, before actually goes with the second action. I took off my shoes before I got into bed. Here's another mistake. A couple of problems with this one. Before, comma, I drove to work. So remember, when we begin our sentence with before or after a while, we use a comma at the end of the first clause, not right after the word here like this. And the other problem is that we use before, after, and while in these ways to connect two ideas in a sentence, two clauses. Here I don't have two, I only have one. It should be something like this. Before I drove to work, comma, I brushed the snow off my car. And this is the last type of problem I see a lot in student writing. While I was brushing off my car, period, my hands got cold. So the period here signals the end of a sentence. But remember, we need to use while to connect two ideas, two clauses in a sentence. And here I don't have two, I have only one. So I need to remove the comma and remove the period, replace it with a comma, and now I have something like this. While I was brushing off my car, comma, my hands got cold. So why do we need to use these words before, after, a while? Well, for one thing, they explain time relationships, and this is very important so that your reader can understand the order that things happen. Also, they make your writing more interesting and have a better flow. Let me show you what I mean when I'm talking about this. I'm going to show you two paragraphs. They are almost the same, but in the first one, I don't use these words, before, after, and while, and the second one I do. I think you're going to agree that the second paragraph is easier to read, easier to listen to, and better. So let's take a look. This is a true story. The first one, I will not use these words. Last summer, I went hiking in Colorado with my family. One day we decided to walk to the top of a mountain. We checked the weather forecast. It said there was a chance of rain. We started the hike. We walked. It started to rain. We didn't want to hike in dangerous conditions, so we stopped and took a break. We waited for the weather to improve. The sun came out again. We continued our walk to the top of the mountain. Now, there's nothing wrong with the grammar of this paragraph, but it does feel robotic. It's like action, 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 action. This is harder to read and harder to hear, and it's not as enjoyable for the reader as it could be. So let me show you this exact same paragraph where I just added a few examples of the words that we practiced today. So here's the second example. Last summer I went hiking in Colorado with my family. One day we decided to walk to the top of a mountain. We checked the weather forecast before we started to hike, and it said there was a chance of rain. Sure enough, while we were walking, it started to rain. We didn't want to hike in dangerous conditions, so we stopped and took a break while we waited for the weather to improve. After the sun came out, we continued our walk to the top of the mountain. So I only used 4 of these words. I used before, I used while twice, and I used after. But you can see that this paragraph has a much better flow to it. It's better to read and it's better to listen to. It's not so choppy, it's not like a robot. So you don't need to use a lot of these words, but using them just a little bit can really improve your writing. So I hope that you will try using before, after, and while. I think you're really going to love the results. So if you have any questions about how to use these words, leave me a note in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer you. And if this is helpful for you, remember to subscribe and turn on your notifications because we've got more videos every week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.